Good time of day wherever you are, and I'm so not excited that it's already Sunday, but we have so much to discuss about Ukraine. A certain attack of the armed forces of Ukraine has Russians in panic. Most of the world is really concerned about how close and how quickly Putin and Erdogan's relationship is becoming. And the latter, shall I say, disgraced Russian president is losing his throne. With that, hi, my name is Yulia and you're watching Sunday News Briefly, where we discuss everything that happened in and pertaining to Ukraine in the past 24 hours, as well as highlight all the important events in this week so far. This week was full of very interesting updates, and most of them came out from none other than Russia. First and foremost, 20 former convicts who were mobilized to the war in Ukraine by Russia deserted their Russian army's positions in Donetsk Oblast. In fact, they pretty much escaped while being transported to their combat assignments. Are we really surprised? That's what happens when you mobilize people who are really not up for the task. I guess in order to fix that situation, Russia decided to do what Russia does best, and they pretty much forcefully detained 100,000 men in Moscow in order to send them as cannon fodder to the war in Ukraine. The men were quite literally yanked out from the streets and brought to Russian enlistment offices. Here's the official press release from Memorial. They, detained men, are still kept in the military registration and enlistment office. Relatives of the detainees told our lawyer they used force against them and forced them to undergo a medical examination. Now there is no contact with any of the men. And this comes right in time as Russia releases their new propaganda posters all over the country. Now let me translate that for you. It's propaganda against abortion in Russia. And it says, "Protect me today and I will protect you tomorrow." Effectively, Russians are basically trying to tell their women to birth as many babies, preferably men obviously, as they can so they can go and kill Ukrainians in the future. Fantastic. On the foreground of these events, or maybe everything else that Russia has done recently, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are cutting most of their ties with Russia. If you don't know, both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan belong to the oil and gas union with Russia, and both these countries recently decided not to sign the trade agreement. Here's the deal. Basically, Russia held its grip on all the former Soviet republics by, mafia style, giving them a roof over all of their operations, sort of like holding their economics and being a monopoly on the development of these countries. And the fact that despite that, these countries are now separating from it really shows that they do not see Russia nor as a threat anymore, nor as something valuable for them. And then the International Committee of the Red Cross said that on December 8th, they visited prisoners of war in both Russian and Ukrainian facilities where they're being held in order to provide them with blankets, basic necessities, and examine in which conditions those prisoners of war live. They said that in both cases, the prisoners of war have pretty satisfactory conditions. The US House passed a record amount for the US defense budget for 2023, including a lot of aid for Ukraine. $858 billion are going to be allocated to national defense of the United States. 800 million of that will go to aid Ukrainian defensive against Russia. In the past 24 hours, let's start with our first topic, and that's the attack on Melitopol, the city in Zaporizhzhia Oblast that has been under Russian grip since the beginning of the invasion and serves as one of the most important strategic locations for both armies. As I mentioned previously, the legitimate mayor of the city, Ivan Fedorov, has said that the attack resulted in 200 wounded and dead soldiers of the Russian Federation. While looking for more information about what happened today on Twitter, I stumbled upon an account of a Ukrainian soldier who gave a really good breakdown of exactly why this attack is so significant. There have been rumors flying around on Russian Telegram channels that Ukraine struck a hotel and a recreation complex with Russian civilians. Now, yes, the military base of Russian soldiers was located in a hotel/recreation center, but there were no civilians there. He said that those weren't just regular Russian chmobiks or mobiks, so recently mobilized, partially mobilized, or mobilized, they were actually higher-ranking officers and legitimately trained military. Speaking of Ukrainian strikes on critical Russian military infrastructure, you do remember those strikes last week on airfields in Russia, right? Previously announced Ukrainian UAV with a range of 1,000 kilometers has been up in air and undergoing its final stages of testing. Ukrbоронпром announced that the drone will be able to attack targets behind enemy lines several times and then return to its home base. And while it's really good that Ukraine is starting to make incredible progress in taking Russia out of our country, we are still suffering a lot from all the destruction that Russia has managed to cause so far. All thermal and hydroelectric power plants in Ukraine have been damaged due to Russia's aggression. In order to help mend that situation a little bit and provide Ukraine with power supply, Germany is going to provide 470 generators to Ukraine, worth about 19.5 million euros altogether. One of the key structures that suffered due to the energy attacks is the port of Odessa. The energy facilities in the region were shelled incessantly over the past couple of weeks, and that took the port out of commission. Now, that's really bad because a lot of grain to countries that could starve without it is passing through that particular port. So now all of the weight of grain export is on the shoulders of two other ports, Chornomorsk and Pivdenny, which are significantly smaller than that in Odessa. Despite all of the Ukrainian success on the battlefield, the Washington Post expressed an very interesting opinion in their recent article, and I am going to quote them. The steadfastness of the encroachment on Crimea illustrates the intractability of the conflict, and it is difficult to imagine that this struggle for the peninsula will be resolved without further bloodshed. Essentially, the Washington Post goes on to say that they think that the conflict in Ukraine is going to last for more than decades, because it is essentially going to be so difficult for Ukraine to return Crimea. However, that's a very, very interesting opinion, provided that only recently Ukraine was able to strike one of the largest air bases in Crimea located in Sevastopol, and memes victory loading have flooded all of the country because that was one of the biggest and most significant moves towards the return of Crimea that Ukraine has managed to do so far. Ukraine's defense minister Alexei Reznikov doesn't agree with the Washington Post. He thinks that our offensive is steadily continuing and is going to gain some traction very soon. However, he does note that the armed forces of Ukraine are going to wait until the ground freezes because it's going to make it more difficult for heavy equipment to pass from the Russian side. And again, I'm gonna let you hear it from him directly. The plan for Ukraine is very simple: liberation of all of our territories and return to the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine of 1991. And in order to illustrate to you exactly why returning all of our occupied lands is so important, watch this video of a little boy showing the armed forces of Ukraine what Russian soldiers did to his family home. Next up, international relations. The ambassador of Ukraine in Germany said that Berlin proposed to deliver more weapons to Kyiv, which is an interesting development because if we look at how Germany was behaving in the beginning of this invasion, it looked like they really wanted Ukraine to lose. And now, Germany is almost one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine you can find, especially if you listen to Stoltenberg and Scholz. In addition, the German government has promised Ukrainian ambassador that there will be no negotiations with Russia unless Kyiv consents to it, which we know Kyiv won't. Here's what Alexei Makiev had to say to Welt am Sonntag. In direct negotiations, we were assured that there will be more weapons and more ammunition, which ones we will announce together at the appropriate time. Now, while Germany is a spitting image of a perfect ally, Turkey leaves some room for major concern. As I mentioned earlier, the EU is really concerned about Turkey's warm relationship with Russia, especially because it developed after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and after really harsh sanctions that were imposed on Russia. Now, in my personal opinion, Turkey is playing a very two-sided game where they're just trying to get as much out of it for their benefit as possible. They're trying to stay good with the EU, but also they're building a relationship with Russia because no one else is. And obviously, they will be able to monetize on it. But here's what the head of the EU diplomatic relationships, Joseph Borrell, had to say to the European Parliament in his letter. And I quote, "The deepening of Turkish-Russian economic relationship is a source of great concern." He stressed that the EU and Turkey form a customs union, which basically ensures a free passage of goods, including dual-use goods that could be used for both civilian and military purposes. He warned that it's very important to ensure that Turkey doesn't offer Russia opportunities to circumvent sanctions through this customs union. And I agree with him, especially since Turkey has lost its credibility the day that it started being so close to Russia. Speaking of countries that are helping Russia circumvent sanctions, there has been an incredibly interesting development coming out of South Africa. As you remember, South Africa is a member of BRICS Union. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And all of the members of that trade union have been separating from Russia, but South Africa has been holding on. Now, South African MPs are demanding that their government answers if they have been selling weapons to Russia. The request came after the information that a Russian cargo ship, Lady R, was spotted in the port of Simonstown, first unloading cargo and then receiving it. The vessel itself is already heavily sanctioned by the EU and the US, exactly because of transporting weapons to Russia. So it's not uncanny that the MPs would want to know. What's up with that? So the story I'm about to tell you doesn't necessarily qualify for international relationships or world news, but I think it's time for its protagonist to enter the international arena. Meet Vasyl Stus. He was a Ukrainian poet, literary critic, translator, and an active member of Ukrainian dissident movement. In other words, Vasyl Stus was promoting the importance of Ukrainian language and empowering Ukrainian culture, for which he was convicted multiple times, highly prosecuted by the Soviet authorities, and later died in a labor camp in 1985 from a heart attack. Vasyl Stus was posthumously awarded the Hero of Ukraine Order and also holds Shevchenko's National Prize in Literature. He was one of many Ukrainians who suffered an ill fate due to Russia's colonization and imperialistic ambitions, and every Ukrainian will always remember him and is incredibly thankful for his work. Today marks the day of his remembrance, and the University of Pennsylvania decided to include a film about him called Prohibited in one of their courses. This course vows to promote Ukrainian culture in general, specifically focusing on film. How proud would Vasyl Stus be to find out that the most trending language on Duolingo in 2022 was indeed Ukrainian. More than 1.3 million people started learning it. Ireland, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic were the most active in doing so. Thank you guys, and we can't wait to show you around Ukraine when you visit and show off your newly acquired language skills. Now, this is going to be a pretty gruesome, but a very, very necessary transition, because we have to remember all the people who fought for it to be possible for me, for you, and for everyone to be able to speak Ukrainian. And those are Ukrainian defenders. In memory of our fallen heroes, 2 events have taken place in Ukraine this weekend. One is this exhibit of blue and yellow flags in the snow with inscriptions of call signs and dates of death of our fallen defenders of Mariupol. And the other event is an exhibition in Lviv dedicated to the fallen heroes of Azov called Tougher Than Steel. Take a look.
Meanwhile, in Russia,
Putin may be losing all of his support due to his defeats. The, shall I say, disgraced Russian president, or according to Politico, the biggest loser of the year, Vladimir Putin, may be losing his support not only among the international community, but also among the heads of the so-called republics of DNR and LNR, the Russian military, even the Russian military blogger community. And all of that because of the Russian troops' inability to push Ukrainian troops as far out of Donetsk as possible. In order to put a band-aid on the problem, and instead of just simply leaving the territory of Ukraine and ending the invasion, Vladimir Putin decided to allocate a whopping 1/3 of Russia's overall 2023 budget to its security forces and the military. According to the British intelligence, even though it is a significant increase compared to previous years, this very well may not be enough to cover the costs of the war with Ukraine. And I don't know what prompted him to arrive to this brilliant conclusion, but Vladimir Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, said that the relationship between Russia and the West has reached the stage of confrontation, and they're just gonna have to live with it. So it's been 9 months, so many sanctions. Most of the civilized world, and by civilized I mean anyone but Russia, completely and utterly breaking off all relationships with you, your government, and your country, and you only now arrived at the conclusion that the West doesn't want to have a relationship with you and you're just gonna have to live with it? Profound. Another profound conclusion was made by British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, who is pessimistic about a chance of quick and sincere peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Honestly, I don't even know how to eloquently comment on that one because duh. But anyways, I'll let you hear it from the man himself. I see nothing from the Russian side that would give me confidence that Vladimir Putin will go to these talks in good faith. The general rhetoric is still very confrontational. He then pointed out that Britain, of course, stands for the peace talks to happen as soon as possible, but the parameters for them should be indicated by Ukraine. Thank you. Very, very, very sweet of you. Thank you. And it wouldn't be a proper news cycle without general madness coming out from Russia, except now it's not coming from the Russian propagandists, it's coming from your everyday, average, good Russian who didn't do anything wrong. In the Russian city of Tver, in the very center, on their main Christmas tree hung a garland with the presidents of Ukraine, the US, France, and Russian activists who opposed the war in Ukraine. People were offered and encouraged to tear off limbs off of these drawings. After the publicity that this stunt has garnered online, the city administration has issued the statement that the garland was noticed and removed within the first 30 minutes of its existence. And while that's probably one of the most sensible things that the Russian government administration has done since February 24th, it still is reason for a lot of concern because this is not Russian government, nor is this Russian propagandists who are pushing for things like that. It is quite literally your regular Russian people that a lot of Westerners like to advocate for as innocent victims. Yeah, very innocent victims who are perpetuating the war in Ukraine and want to punish those who oppose it. Now on this lovely note, that's all I have for you for today, and if you enjoyed watching this video or found it informative, please don't forget to give it a like, comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications so you know when the next one comes out. And as always, check your sources and don't fall for Russian propaganda, and I will see you on Wednesday.